The marble floors of my foyer echoed with the sound of my bare feet as I approached the massive oak door. Through the security camera monitor, I could see them, my entire family huddled together on my doorstep like refugees seeking shelter. Mom clutched her worn purse against her chest, Dad shifted uncomfortably in his old suit, and my sister Sarah kept glancing around at the manicured gardens that surrounded my estate. 18 years. 18 years since they'd made it crystal clear I wasn't welcome at family gatherings. 18 years since I'd been deemed the black sheep, the disappointment, the one who didn't fit in with their vision of success. And now here they were, standing at the door of the very success they dismissed. I took a deep breath and opened the door, my silk robe catching the afternoon breeze. The shock on their faces was immediate and satisfying, though I kept my expression neutral. "Hello, Mom. Dad. Sarah." My voice was soft, controlled. Years of therapy had taught me that gentleness could be more powerful than anger. "Emma." Mom's voice cracked, her eyes taking in the crystal chandelier visible behind me, the sweeping staircase, the oil paintings that probably cost more than their house. We need to talk to you." Dad cleared his throat, his pride obviously wounded by having to stand here as a supplicant. "We heard about your success. We thought maybe we could work things out." I almost laughed. Success. As if my tech company going public and making me worth over $50 million overnight had somehow changed who I was as a person. As if the daughter they'd systematically excluded from every birthday party, every holiday dinner, every family vacation for nearly 2 decades had suddenly become worthy of their attention. "Work things out?" I repeated, stepping aside to let them enter. They filed past me, their shoes clicking nervously on the imported Italian marble. "That's interesting timing." The living room they entered was a showcase of everything money could buy, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific, furniture that belonged in a museum, art that I'd purchased not because I understood it, but because I could afford it. Every piece was a monument to the success they'd refused to acknowledge, the dreams they'd mocked, the potential they'd dismissed. Sarah couldn't stop staring. At 35, she was still the golden child, married to a dentist, 2 kids, the perfect suburban life that Mom and Dad celebrated at every family gathering I'd never been invited to. But I could see the envy in her eyes now, the way she calculated the cost of everything around her. This is really something, Emma," she said, her voice tight with forced enthusiasm. "You've done so well for yourself." "Have I?" I sat down across from them, crossing my legs elegantly. "Funny, because for the last 18 years, you all seem to think I was a complete failure." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mom fidgeted with her purse strap, Dad studied his hands, and Sarah looked everywhere except at me. "Emma, sweetie," Mom finally said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood. "We know we've made mistakes. We know we hurt you. But we're family. Family forgives. Family forgives," I repeated slowly. That's rich, coming from the woman who told everyone at Sarah's wedding that she only had one daughter. Mom's face paled. "You heard about that?" "I hear about everything, Mom. Just because you excluded me doesn't mean the rest of the world did." I leaned back in my chair, a piece that cost more than most people's cars. "I know about every family gathering, every celebration, every milestone you celebrated without me. I know about the lie you told everyone, that I was traveling for work or couldn't make it instead of admitting you simply didn't invite me." Dad finally looked up, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "You were difficult, Emma. You always were. You never fit in with what we wanted for this family." "What you wanted," I corrected. "Which was what, exactly? A daughter who would smile and nod and never question why her parents treated her like she was invisible?" "You were rebellious," Sarah interjected, finally finding her voice. "You never listened. You always thought you knew better than everyone else. I was 18 when you all decided I wasn't worth including anymore, I said, my voice still eerily calm. 18, fresh out of high school, applying to colleges. What exactly did I do that was so unforgivable? The silence that followed was deafening. They exchanged glances, the kind of loaded looks that spoke of shared secrets, of stories they told themselves to justify their behavior. You know what you did, Mom whispered. And suddenly, I was transported back to that summer 18 years ago, standing in our old kitchen with college brochures spread across the table, excitement bubbling in my chest as I talked about majoring in computer science, about the scholarships I'd earned, about the future I was going to build. Computer science? Dad had laughed, not the kind laugh of a proud father, but the dismissive chuckle of someone who thought he was dealing with a child's fantasy. Emma, be realistic. You're not smart enough for that. Why don't you think about something more suitable? Maybe teaching. Or nursing. I remembered the way that laugh had felt like a physical blow, the way it had crushed something hopeful and bright inside me. But I'd persisted, hadn't I? I'd shown them my acceptance letters, my scholarship offers, the glowing recommendations from my teachers. You're making a mistake, Mom had said, shaking her head sadly. This isn't who you are, Emma. You're setting yourself up for failure, and we won't be here to pick up the pieces. But it was Sarah's words that had cut the deepest. Stop embarrassing us, Emma. Just because you got lucky on some tests doesn't mean you're actually smart. Mom and Dad are trying to help you, and you're too stubborn to listen. That was when I realized they weren't just unsupportive, they actively didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me small, manageable, dependent. They wanted me to fail so they could feel superior. I remember now, I said quietly, bringing myself back to the present. I remember what I did that was so unforgivable. I refused to make myself smaller for your comfort. I refused to fail just to make you feel better about yourselves. Mom's eyes filled with tears, whether from guilt or manipulation, I couldn't tell anymore. We just wanted what was best for you. No, I said, standing up. You wanted what was easiest for you. A daughter who wouldn't challenge your narrow view of the world. A daughter who would validate your choices by making the same safe, small decisions you made. I walked to the massive window overlooking my infinity pool, the guest house, the tennis court I had installed because I could, not because I played tennis. Do you know what the real tragedy is? I spent years, trying to prove myself worthy of your love. I thought if I just succeeded enough, achieved enough, made enough money, you'd finally see me as someone worth celebrating. I turned back to face them. But looking at you now, I realize something. You don't love me more because I'm successful. You're here because you want something. And that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Dad shifted uncomfortably, confirming my suspicions. Emma, we're in a bit of trouble. Don't. My voice cut through his words like ice. Don't you dare reduce this to money. Not after 18 years of silence. But even as I said it, I could see the truth in their desperate eyes, the way they kept glancing around at my wealth like drowning people eyeing a life preserver. They weren't here for me. They were here for what I could give them. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. After all these years of wondering if I'd been wrong, if I'd been too sensitive, if I'd imagined their cruelty, here was proof that my instincts had been right all along. How much do you need? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a weapon. Mom gasped, Dad's face flushed crimson, and Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into the expensive sofa. It's not like that, Sarah protested weakly. Isn't it? I moved back to my chair, but didn't sit. Instead, I loomed over them, feeling powerful in a way that had nothing to do with money. Then tell me, Sarah. Tell me why, after 18 years of treating me like I don't exist, you're suddenly interested in a relationship with your sister. But before she could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it automatically, and the words on the screen made my blood run cold. It was from my cousin Jake, the only family member who'd stayed in touch with me over the years. Emma, you need to know something about your family's visit. It's not what you think. There's something they're not telling you about why they cut you out. Something that changes everything. I looked up at my family, sitting in my living room like strangers, their eyes full of guilt and desperation and secrets I was only beginning to understand. Actually, I said, sliding my phone into my pocket, before we discuss anything else, I think it's time you told me the real reason you excluded me all these years. And this time, I want the truth. The truth. Such a simple word, but it hung between us like a live wire, crackling with 18 years of accumulated lies and half-truths. Mom's face had gone pale at my demand, and I watched as she exchanged another one of those loaded glances with Dad. Sarah was studying her manicured nails with the intensity of someone trying to disappear entirely. I think, I said, settling back into my chair with the fluid grace that money had bought me, personal trainers, yoga instructors, posture coaches who taught me to carry myself like the success I'd become, we should start at the beginning. The real beginning. Emma, sweetie, maybe we should focus on the present, Mom started. The present where you show up at my door after 18 years because you need money? I interrupted. No, I don't think so. See, I've spent nearly 2 decades wondering what I did wrong. What terrible crime I committed that made my own family decide I wasn't worth loving. And now I'm thinking maybe the crime wasn't something I did. Maybe it was something I was. I pulled out my phone again, Jake's cryptic message still glowing on the screen. My cousin Jake seems to think there's something you haven't told me. Something that changes everything. Would you like to explain what that might be? The silence stretched so long I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway counting the seconds. Tick. 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 Each sound like a hammer blow against their composure. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Jake doesn't know what he's talking about. Doesn't he? I leaned forward. Because Jake's been the only one in this family who's treated me like a human being for the past 18 years. The only one who's kept me informed about what you've all been up to. Including some very interesting stories about family gatherings where my name was actively avoided. Sarah finally looked up. You don't understand the pressure we were under. What pressure? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. She looked at Mom and Dad desperately, seeking permission for something. When Dad gave the slightest nod, she took a shaky breath. Grandma Rose left a will, she said quietly. Every cell in my body went still. Grandma Rose, my father's mother, the woman who'd raised me as much as my own parents had, who'd died when I was 17. The woman who'd believed in me when no one else did, who'd encouraged my dreams, who'd told me I could be anything I wanted to be. Grandma Rose died over 18 years ago, I said carefully. What does her will have to do with anything? Mom was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She left everything to you, Emma. Everything. The house, the investments, the life insurance money. All of it. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the arms of my chair, fighting to keep my expression neutral even as my world tilted sideways. That's impossible, I whispered. I never inherited anything from Grandma Rose. I was 17, broke, working part-time jobs to pay for college applications. If she'd left me money. We told you she died broke, Dad said, his voice hollow. We told you the funeral costs ate up everything she had. The room spun around me. I remembered that time so clearly, the grief of losing the only family member who'd ever truly supported me, compounded by the stress of watching my parents struggle with what they claimed were overwhelming funeral expenses. I'd felt so guilty for adding the burden of college costs on top of everything else. How much? My voice was barely audible. The house was worth about $400,000 then, Sarah said miserably. The investments and insurance, maybe another $300,000 total. $700,000. When I was 17 years old, struggling to figure out how to pay for college, wondering if I'd have to give up my dreams because I couldn't afford them, there had been $700,000 with my name on it. But that's not even the worst part, Sarah continued, the words tumbling out like a confession she'd been holding back for years. The will, it had a clause. If anything happened to you, if you died or if you were declared mentally incompetent or unable to manage your affairs, it would all go to your next of kin. To us. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. So you convinced me I was too stupid for college. You told me I wasn't smart enough, wasn't capable enough, that I'd fail and embarrass the family. You were trying to get me declared incompetent. No. Mom cried. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? I stood up, pacing to the window again because I needed to move, needed to do something with the rage building in my chest like a living thing. Let me guess what happened next. I refused to fail. I went to college anyway, got my degree, started my company. I proved I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. So you couldn't have me declared incompetent. I turned back to face them. But you found another way, didn't you? You cut me out of the family. Made me the black sheep. Because if I never knew about the inheritance, I could never claim it. Dad's face was gray. The statute of limitations, there were time limits. Of course there were. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So you waited. You waited until enough time had passed that I couldn't legally claim what was mine. And then you split it among yourselves. We were going to tell you, Mom sobbed. We were going to give you your share once. Once what? Once you'd stolen it legally? Once you'd made sure I could never fight for it? I shook my head. Do you know what's really sick about this? It was never about the money for me. I would have used it for college, yes, but then I would have shared it with all of you. I would have helped when you needed help. I would have been generous because that's who I am. I walked over to where they sat, looking down at them from my full height. But you couldn't take that risk, could you? You couldn't trust that I might be generous. You had to make sure you got yours first. You were always different from us, Dad said desperately. Always pushing boundaries, always thinking you were better. I was never different from you, I interrupted. I was different from who you wanted me to be. And apparently, who you wanted me to be was someone small enough that you didn't have to worry about me threatening your piece of Grandma Rosa's legacy. Sarah was crying now too. We thought if we kept you away long enough, you'd give up. You'd find your own life and forget about all of us. Forget about you? I stared at her in amazement. Sarah, I spent years wondering what was wrong with me. Years thinking I was the problem, that I was unlovable, that something about me was fundamentally broken. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? I pulled out my phone and dialed Jake's number. He answered on the first ring. Emma? Are they there? They're here, I said, putting the phone on speaker. And they just told me about Grandma Rosa's will. Jake's voice came through clearly, audible to everyone in the room. Jesus. They actually admitted it. You've known all along? I asked. I found out about 5 years ago, he said. I was helping my dad clean out some old paperwork, and I found a copy of the will. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without destroying what was left of your relationship with them. Mom was shaking her head frantically, mouthing no at the phone as if Jake could see her. There's more, isn't there? I said, though it wasn't really a question. Yeah. Jake's voice was grim. Emma, they didn't just hide the inheritance from you. They actively worked to sabotage you. Your dad called your college admissions office senior year and tried to get your early acceptance revoked. Said you were having a mental breakdown, that you weren't stable enough for higher education. The room tilted again. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. What? It didn't work, Jake continued quickly. Your grades were too good, your teachers vouched for you. But they tried. And when you graduated college and started applying for jobs, your mom called at least 3 companies and told them you were unreliable. I looked at my mother, this woman who'd given birth to me, who'd raised me, who I'd loved despite everything. Is that true? She couldn't meet my eyes. We thought if things were harder for you, you'd come home. You'd let us take care of you. You sabotaged my job prospects so I'd be dependent on you? We wanted you close, she whispered. You wanted me controllable. I was amazed by how calm my voice sounded, even as everything inside me was screaming. You wanted me to fail so you could feel better about stealing from me. Jake's voice came through the phone again. Emma, there's one more thing. More? I couldn't imagine what else they could have done. The reunion last weekend. The big family gathering for your cousin Michelle's graduation. They didn't just not invite you. They specifically planned it to celebrate how well the family was doing without you. Sarah posted about it on Facebook. She said something about how peaceful family gatherings were when certain people weren't there to cause drama. I looked at Sarah, who had buried her face in her hands. You celebrated my absence. We were angry, she said through her tears. We heard you'd started your company, that you were doing well, and we were angry that you'd succeeded without us. That you'd proven us wrong. So you decided to hurt me. We didn't think you'd see it, Dad said weakly. But I did see it. Just like I've seen every celebration, every milestone, every moment of joy that you've had without me. I ended the call with Jake and set my phone down. Do you know what the cruelest part is? I still loved you. All of you. Even after 18 years of exclusion, of wondering what I'd done wrong, of feeling like there was something fundamentally unlovable about me. I still loved you. I walked to the massive window and looked out at the life I'd built, the success I'd achieved not because of my family, but despite them. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd tried to keep me from my inheritance, but in doing so, they'd forced me to become far more successful than I ever would have been with Grandma Rose's money. But here's the thing, I said without turning around. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's just emotional manipulation. And respect is earned through actions, not words. When I turned back to face them, I saw 3 people who suddenly looked very small in my very large living room. 3 people who'd spent 18 years convinced they were smarter than me, more deserving than me, better than me. 3 people who'd just realized they'd been very, very wrong. So, I said quietly, now that we've established the truth about the past, let's talk about why you're really here. What do you need from me? And please, don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is about reconciliation. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, my doorbell rang again. Through the security monitor, I could see a man in an expensive suit standing on my doorstep, briefcase in hand. Excuse me, I said, walking toward the foyer. It seems we have another visitor. But as I approached the door, Sarah's voice stopped me cold. Emma, wait. That's our lawyer. I turned slowly. Your lawyer? Mom was sobbing openly now. We hoped, if we could just talk to you, explain things, you might be willing to help us with our legal problems. We thought maybe you'd help us pay for representation. Legal problems? I repeated. Sarah met my eyes for the first time since they'd arrived. We're being sued, Emma. All of us. For fraud. The money from Grandma Rose's will, we might have to give it all back. The lawyer at my door was named Richard Pemberton, and he had the kind of polished, expensive look that screamed prestigious firm and billable hours that could fund a small country. As I let him into my foyer, I could practically see him calculating the worth of everything around him, the imported marble, the original artwork, the crystal chandelier that cost more than most people's annual salary. Ms. Carter, he said, extending a manicured hand. Richard Pemberton, from Pemberton, Hayes and Associates. I represent your family in their current situation. I glanced back at my parents and sister, who looked like they wanted to crawl under my expensive furniture and disappear. Their situation being fraud charges? Alleged fraud, he corrected smoothly. Though I'm afraid the allegations are quite serious. I led him into the living room, where my family sat like defendants at their own trial. The contrast was almost comical, them huddled together on one side, looking shabby and desperate, while I stood tall in my silk robe, surrounded by the fruits of the success they'd tried so hard to prevent. Please, I said, gesturing to a chair. Explain to me what my family has allegedly done. Pemberton opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. Are you familiar with the Hartwell Foundation? I frowned. The charity foundation? The one that provides scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing STEM education? That's the one. He pulled out a thick folder. Your family has been involved with the foundation for several years, serving on various committees, helping with fundraising events. I looked at my parents in surprise. This was the first I'd heard of any charitable involvement from them. That's admirable. It would be, Pemberton said grimly, if they hadn't been embezzling funds for the past 8 years. The words hit the room like a bomb. I stared at my family, watching as 3 generations of secrets and lies finally came crashing down around them. 8 years? I repeated. According to the forensic accountants, yes. It started small, a few $1,000s here and there, skimmed from fundraising events. But it escalated quickly. In total, they're accused of stealing over $2 million from scholarship funds. $2 million. Money that was supposed to help kids like I'd been, smart, ambitious, but without the resources to pursue their dreams. Money that could have changed hundreds of lives. How? My voice was barely a whisper. Dad finally found his voice. It wasn't supposed to go on so long. We just needed a little help at first, your mother's cancer treatment, the bills were piling up. Cancer treatment? I turned to stare at my mother. You had cancer? Mom nodded miserably. 4 years ago. Breast cancer. The insurance didn't cover everything, and with your father's business struggling. You had cancer and you didn't tell me? The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Your daughter, and you didn't think I deserved to know you were sick. You weren't part of our lives anymore, Sarah said defensively. We couldn't just call you up after years of silence and ask for help. So instead you stole from a charity, I said flatly. Pemberton cleared his throat. The initial theft was relatively small, as your father indicated. But then it became a way to maintain their lifestyle, to keep up appearances. They used the money to pay for home improvements, vacations, your sister's children's private school tuition. I looked at Sarah with new eyes. You put your kids in private school with stolen money? We were going to pay it back, she said desperately. We always planned to pay it back. With what money? I demanded. From what I can see, none of you have particularly lucrative careers. Dad's contracting business has been struggling for years, Mom never worked outside the home, and Sarah, you're a part-time real estate agent in a small town. Where exactly was this payback money going to come from? The silence that followed was my answer. Pemberton consulted his notes. The foundation's board became suspicious when they noticed discrepancies in the books. They hired forensic accountants, and the trail led directly to your family. The evidence is overwhelming. How overwhelming? I asked. Bank records, forged receipts, altered fundraising reports. They documented everything, but they didn't cover their tracks particularly well. He looked at my family with barely concealed disdain. It's one of the sloppiest embezzlement schemes I've ever seen. I almost wanted to laugh. These people who'd convinced themselves they were smarter than me, more deserving than me, had been caught in a $2 million fraud scheme because they were too arrogant to properly cover their tracks. What are they facing? I asked. Multiple felony charges. Grand theft, fraud, money laundering. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time. Your parents could get 10 to 15 years each, your sister slightly less since she was brought in later. The room spun around me. Prison. My family, the people who'd raised me, who'd shared Christmas mornings and birthday cakes with me before everything went wrong, were facing prison time. But, Pemberton continued, there might be a way to minimize the charges. And there it was. The real reason they were here. Let me guess, I said. If they pay back the money, the foundation might be willing to settle out of court. Exactly. Full restitution plus damages and penalties. We're looking at approximately $4 million total. $4 million. A sum that would bankrupt most people, but for me, barely a dent in my net worth. And you thought I'd pay it, I said, looking at my family. Emma, please, Mom said, reaching toward me with shaking hands. We know we don't deserve it. We know we've been terrible to you. But we're desperate. You're facing prison, I corrected. There's a difference. Dad leaned forward, his pride finally cracking completely. We'll do anything, Emma. Anything you ask. We'll make it up to you, You'll what? I interrupted. You'll finally treat me like family? You'll finally admit that I'm not the failure you convinced yourselves I was? You'll finally acknowledge that you were wrong about me? Yes, Sarah said quickly. Yes, all of that. I walked to the window again, looking out at the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. $4 million. In the grand scheme of my wealth, it was manageable. I could write that check and barely feel it. But the question wasn't whether I could afford it. The question was whether they deserved it. Tell me about Mom's cancer, I said without turning around. Emma, Mom started. Tell me, I repeated firmly. I want to know everything. When you were diagnosed, what the prognosis was, what treatments you had. I want to know what it was like to face that alone because you decided your daughter wasn't worth including in your life. Mom's voice shook as she spoke. It was stage 2 when they found it. The doctors said, they said I had a good chance if we caught it early enough. But the treatments were so expensive, and your father's business was already struggling because of the economy. So you turned to theft instead of turning to your daughter who would have helped you without question, I said. We couldn't ask you for help, Dad said. Not after everything that had happened between us. I turned to face him. Everything that had happened? You mean everything you did to me? The lies, the sabotage, the exclusion. You couldn't ask for help because you knew you'd have to admit what you'd done. We were ashamed, Mom whispered. You were proud, I corrected. Too proud to admit you'd been wrong about me. Too proud to swallow your egos and ask your successful daughter for help. So instead, you stole money from kids who needed it more than you did. I walked back to where Pemberton sat, watching our family drama unfold with the detached interest of someone who'd seen it all before. For $1 million, I said. That's what it would take to make this go away. Plus my fees, he added. And ongoing legal costs if any complications arise. Of course. I looked at my family, these 3 people who'd shaped my childhood, who'd taught me what love was supposed to look like, who'd broken my heart so thoroughly I'd spent years thinking I was unlovable. And then I thought about Grandma Rose. About the woman who'd believed in me when no one else did, who'd left me her legacy because she'd seen something in me that my own parents couldn't. About the inheritance they'd stolen, the opportunities they'd tried to deny me, the years of success they'd tried to sabotage. I'll give you the money, I said quietly. The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Mom started crying again, Dad slumped forward like a man reprieved from execution, and Sarah actually smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. But, I continued, and their expressions froze, there are conditions. Pemberton leaned forward with professional interest. What kind of conditions? I moved to my desk and pulled out a legal pad, writing quickly. First, you'll sign over any remaining assets from Grandma Rose's inheritance. Whatever you haven't spent, whatever's left of the house sale, any investments still in your names. All of it comes to me. Emma, Sarah started. Second, I continued without looking up, you'll each write a letter of confession detailing exactly what you did to me over the past 18 years. The lies you told, the opportunities you sabotaged, the ways you excluded me. These letters will be notarized and kept by my lawyers. Why? Dad asked. Insurance, I said simply. To make sure you never try to rewrite history or make yourselves the victims in this story. I kept writing. Third, you'll publicly apologize. On social media, to your friends, to anyone who's ever heard you speak badly about me or exclude me from family events. You'll tell the truth about what you did and why you did it. That's humiliating, Sarah protested. Is it more humiliating than prison? I asked without looking up. She fell silent. Fourth, I continued, you'll enter family therapy. All of you. And you'll stay in therapy until the therapist determines you've made genuine progress in understanding the damage you've done. Mom was nodding eagerly. Yes, of course. Whatever you want. And finally, I said, setting down my pen and looking at each of them in turn, you'll stay away from me for 1 full year. No contact, no visits, no attempts at reconciliation. You'll take that year to think about what you've done and who you want to be going forward. A year? Sarah looked stricken. Emma, we want to rebuild our relationship. No, I said firmly. You want me to solve your problems. There's a difference. And after 18 years of proving you don't value me as a person, you don't get to suddenly decide you want a relationship just because you need something. I handed the list to Pemberton. These are my conditions. If they agree to all of them, I'll transfer the money to your client account within 24 hours. If they refuse any of them, they can figure out how to pay for their defense on their own. Pemberton read through the list, his eyebrows rising slightly. These are quite comprehensive. They're fair, I said. Considering the circumstances. I looked at my family, these 3 people who'd been so sure they were better than me, smarter than me, more deserving than me. who'd spent 18 years proving they valued their pride more than they valued me. "So," I said quietly, "what's it going to be?" The silence that followed my ultimatum was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, pride warring with desperation, ego battling against the very real prospect of federal prison. Pemberton sat back in his chair, clearly fascinated by the family drama unfolding before him. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Emma, these conditions, they're very harsh." "Harsh?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Dad, you stole money from scholarships for underprivileged kids. You spent 18 years excluding me from this family. You tried to sabotage my education and my career. And you think my conditions are harsh?" "We're your family," Sarah said desperately. "Families should forgive each other, help each other unconditionally." I stared at her in amazement. "Unconditionally? Sarah, where was that philosophy when I needed help 18 years ago? Where was unconditional family love when I was applying to colleges, when I was starting my career, when I was building my life without a single word of encouragement from any of you?" "That was different," she said weakly. "How?" I demanded. "How was it different? Because I was young? Because I hadn't proven myself yet? Because I didn't have millions of dollars to solve your problems?" Mom spoke up, her voice trembling. "We made mistakes, Emma. Terrible mistakes. But we're here now, trying to make things right." "No," I said, moving closer to where they sat. "You're here because you're facing prison. You're here because you need money. If you'd won the lottery yesterday, would you be sitting in my living room right now?" The silence was my answer. Pemberton cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we could discuss modifications to the conditions." "No modifications," I said firmly. "These conditions aren't just about punishment. They're about accountability. They're about ensuring that if I do this, if I save them from the consequences of their own choices, they actually learn something from it." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. "I've been getting messages all afternoon. Word travels fast in our family, apparently." The messages were from various cousins, aunts, uncles, family members who'd witnessed my exclusion over the years but had stayed silent. Now, suddenly, they were all reaching out. "Cousin Marie says she always wondered why I never came to family events," I read aloud. "Uncle Tom says he thought it was strange that I was always traveling for work. Aunt Linda admits she suspected something was wrong when Mom and Dad refused to talk about me." I looked up at my family. "Do you see what you did? You didn't just hurt me. You forced everyone else in our family to participate in your lie. You made them complicit in my exclusion." "They didn't have to go along with it," Dad said defensively. "Their family," I shot back, throwing his own words at him. "They trusted you. They assumed that if Emma wasn't at family gatherings, there must be a good reason. They gave you the benefit of the doubt because that's what families do for each other." I scrolled through more messages. But here's the interesting part. Jake wasn't the only one who suspected something. Several people have reached out to say they always felt uncomfortable with my absence but didn't know how to address it without causing drama. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "What's your point?" "My point is that your lies had consequences beyond just me. Your actions forced other people to choose sides, and they chose yours because they didn't have all the information." I put my phone away. "Which is why the public apology is non-negotiable. You don't just owe me the truth. You owe it to everyone who's been wondering for 18 years what terrible thing Emma Carter did to deserve being cut out of her own family." Mom was crying again, but this time there was something different in her tears. Less manipulation, more genuine remorse. "I never thought about it like that," she whispered. You never thought about a lot of things, I said, not unkindly. You never thought about how your lies would affect other people. You never thought about what it would do to me to be systematically excluded from my own family. You never thought about the kids who would lose scholarship opportunities because you were stealing their money. I sat down across from them, my silk robe pulling around me like armor. You know what the saddest part is? I would have helped Mom with her cancer treatment. I would have helped Dad with his business. I would have helped Sarah with her kids' education. I would have done all of that gladly, without question, because that's what family does. We know that now, Dad said quietly. Do you? I challenged. Or do you just know that I have money now? Because there's a big difference between understanding that I'm generous and understanding that I've always been worthy of your love and respect. Pemberton checked his watch. Ms. Carter, I should mention that time is somewhat of a factor here. The Foundation's board meets tomorrow to finalize their decision about pressing charges. If we're going to negotiate a settlement, we need to move quickly. I nodded. Then my family needs to make a decision. Accept my conditions and have their legal problems solved by tomorrow evening, or reject them and face whatever consequences come next. What happens if we accept? Mom asked. What happens after the year of no contact? I don't know, I admitted. That depends entirely on what you do with that year. If you use it to genuinely understand and change, then maybe we can build some kind of relationship. If you use it to feel sorry for yourselves and plan how to guilt me into more favors, then we'll have nothing to talk about. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a business card. This is Dr. Patricia Williams. She specializes in family therapy, particularly cases involving long-term emotional abuse and manipulation. If you accept my conditions, you'll call her office first thing tomorrow morning. Sarah took the card with shaking hands. Emotional abuse? Emma, we never. You isolated me from my own family for 18 years, I said flatly. You lied about me to other family members. You sabotaged my opportunities and then excluded me when I succeeded anyway. You stole my inheritance and convinced me I was too stupid and worthless to deserve it. What would you call that? She couldn't answer. I moved to the window one more time, looking out at the life I'd built despite their efforts to destroy me. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was beautiful, peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos in my living room. I need to tell you something, I said without turning around. Something I realized while you were explaining about the Foundation theft. They waited, and I could feel their anxiety filling the room like smoke. I'm not angry anymore, I continued. I was angry for years, furious, actually. I carried that rage around like a stone in my chest, wondering what was wrong with me that my own family could discard me so easily. But sitting here now, listening to your excuses and justifications, I realize I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. I turned to face them. I'm disappointed that the people who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who claimed to love me, could make such consistently selfish choices. I'm disappointed that when faced with challenges, Mom's illness, Dad's business struggles, maintaining your lifestyle, you chose theft over honesty, lies over accountability, pride over love. Mom sobbed harder. Emma, please. I'm not finished, I said gently. I'm disappointed, but I'm also grateful. Because your rejection forced me to become independent. It forced me to develop my own strength, my own moral compass, my own definition of success. If you'd supported me from the beginning, I might never have pushed myself to achieve what I've achieved. I walked back to where they sat, these three broken people who'd shaped my life in ways they'd never intended. So thank you, I said quietly. Thank you for excluding me from your small-minded vision of what family should look like. Thank you for forcing me to prove that I was worthy of love and respect, even if it took me 18 years to realize I didn't need your approval to validate my worth." Pemberton cleared his throat again. "Ms. Carter, I really do need an answer." "Give us a moment," Dad said, looking at his wife and daughter. "We need to discuss this privately." "Of course." I gestured toward the kitchen. "Take your time. But remember, the Foundation's board meets tomorrow. Whatever you decide, we need to act quickly." They huddled together in my kitchen, their voices low and urgent. Through the doorway, I could see them arguing, Sarah gesturing wildly, Mom crying, Dad looking older than his 72 years. They were finally confronting the reality of their choices, the full consequences of 18 years of lies and manipulation. While they talked, I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sipping $1,000 wine while deciding whether to save my family from prison with money I'd earned despite their best efforts to keep me poor and dependent. Pemberton joined me at the bar. "Quite a family dynamic," he observed. "That's one way to put it." I took a sip of wine, savoring the complex flavors. "Tell me honestly, do you think my conditions are reasonable?" He considered the question carefully. "From a legal standpoint, they're well within your rights. You're under no obligation to help them at all, regardless of family relationships. From a human standpoint." He paused. "I've seen a lot of family disputes in my career, Ms. Carter. What your family did to you, the systematic exclusion, the inheritance theft, the active sabotage, that's not normal family dysfunction. That's calculated cruelty. So my conditions are remarkably restrained, considering the circumstances." He glanced toward the kitchen. "Most people in your position would tell them to rot in prison." The thought occurred to me, I admitted. "But you're not going to." "No, I'm not." I finished my wine and set the glass down. "Not because they deserve my help, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to know that I'm the kind of person who chooses compassion over revenge, even when revenge would be justified." From the kitchen came the sound of raised voices, Sarah saying something sharp, Dad's bass tone rumbling back, Mom's higher pitch cutting through both of them. They were fighting about me, arguing about whether my conditions were fair, whether they had any choice in the matter. Finally, they returned to the living room. Dad looked like he'd aged another decade in the past 20 minutes. "We accept," he said simply. "All of the conditions?" I asked. "All of them." Mom's voice was hoarse from crying. "Emma, we accept all of your conditions." I nodded to Pemberton, who immediately pulled out his phone to begin making arrangements. "There's one more thing," I said, stopping him before he could dial. "Something I didn't put on the list because I wanted to see what choice you'd make first." They tensed, probably wondering what fresh hell I was about to impose on them. "I want you to do volunteer work," I said. "Real volunteer work, not the charity board positions you used as cover for your theft. I want you to spend time helping people who actually need help, people who don't have family members with millions of dollars to bail them out of their problems." "What kind of volunteer work?" Sarah asked. "That's up to you. Soup kitchens, homeless shelters, literacy programs, mentoring disadvantaged kids, whatever speaks to you. But I want you to spend at least 10 hours a week for the next year working with people who are genuinely struggling." I looked at each of them in turn. "Maybe then you'll understand the difference between having problems and being grateful for solutions, and feeling entitled to other people's money just because you're related to them." Dad nodded slowly. "We can do that." "Good." I gestured to Pemberton. "Then make your calls. Get this sorted out." As the lawyer began coordinating with the Foundation's legal team, I watched my family sit in my living room, surrounded by the success they'd tried so hard to prevent. They looked small and defeated, but for the first time since they'd arrived, they also looked humbled. Maybe that was enough to start with. But even as I began the process of saving them from their own mistakes, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That there were still secrets, still lies, still consequences waiting to unfold. I was right to be suspicious. The call that would change everything came just as Pemberton was finalizing the settlement arrangements. The call came from Jake, and the urgency in his voice made my blood run cold. "Emma, don't transfer that money yet," he said without preamble. "I just found something else. Something big." I stepped away from where Pemberton was negotiating with the foundation's lawyers, my family watching every move with desperate hope in their eyes. "What kind of something?" I asked quietly. "Meet me at my office. Now. And Emma, don't tell them you're coming. Don't tell them anything until you see what I have to show you." The line went dead. I looked at my family, at Pemberton making calls that would save them from prison, at the scene of reconciliation and redemption playing out in my living room. But Jake's tone had been urgent, worried, and he'd never steered me wrong before. "I need to step out for a bit," I announced. "Personal business. Mr. Pemberton, please continue with the arrangements, but don't transfer any funds until I return." Mom looked panicked. "Emma, where are you going? Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I lied smoothly. "I just need to handle something quickly." I changed into jeans and a sweater, grabbed my car keys, and drove through the darkening streets to Jake's private investigation office downtown. Yes, my cousin Jake, the only family member who'd maintained contact with me, was a private investigator. It's how he'd learned about so many family secrets over the years. His office was in an old building that had seen better days, but Jake had always preferred function over form. I found him at his desk, surrounded by papers and photographs, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by grim concentration. "Jake, what's going on?" He looked up at me with sad, tired eyes. "Sit down, Emma. This is going to be rough." I settled into the worn chair across from his desk, my stomach knotting with dread. "Just tell me." "I've been digging deeper since our phone call earlier," he said, pulling out a thick folder. "The thing about being a PI is that once you start pulling threads, sometimes the whole sweater unravels." He spread photographs across the desk, surveillance photos, bank records, official documents. "Your family's theft from the foundation?" Jake said. It wasn't their first rodeo. My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "I mean they've been running cons for years, Emma. The foundation was just their most ambitious score." He pointed to a bank statement. "See this? That's from 5 years ago. They were running a fake charity for veterans housing. Collected over $300,000 from well-meaning donors." I stared at the documents in horror. 300,000? That's not all. He pulled out more papers. "Before that, there was a fake scholarship fund in your grandmother's name. Before that, a bogus cancer research charity. Emma, your family has been professional con artists for at least a decade." The room spun around me. "That's impossible. They're not sophisticated enough." "That's what makes it brilliant," Jake interrupted. "Who suspects the small-town family? Who questions the bereaved daughter setting up a scholarship in her dead mother's name? They've been hiding in plain sight." He pulled out more photographs, and my breath caught in my throat. They showed my family at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, vacation destinations I'd never heard them mention. "They've been living double lives," Jake continued. "To their friends and neighbors, they're struggling middle-class folks dealing with medical bills and economic hardship. But look at these credit card statements, 5-star resorts, first-class flights, shopping sprees that cost more than most people's annual salaries. But Mom's cancer was real, Jake confirmed. But her treatment was completely covered by insurance. The overwhelming medical bills were fabricated. They used the cancer diagnosis as a cover story to explain why they needed money, and people were so sympathetic that no one asked hard questions. I felt sick. How long have you known? I started suspecting something about a year ago when I noticed inconsistencies in their stories. But I only got solid proof this week. He leaned back in his chair. Emma, there's more. More? I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations. The reason they excluded you from the family, Jake said quietly. It wasn't just about the inheritance money. It was because you were the only one who might have figured out what they were doing. I don't understand. Think about it. You were smart, analytical, detail-oriented. You asked questions. If you'd been around for family dinners, if you'd been involved in their lives, you would have noticed the discrepancies. You would have wondered how they could afford expensive vacations while claiming to be financially struggling. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They didn't exclude me because I was difficult. They excluded me because I was observant. Exactly. And there's one more thing. Jake's expression grew even more grave. The lawyer they brought today? Pemberton? What about him? He's not just their lawyer. He's their partner. I stared at him. What? Jake pulled out surveillance photos showing Pemberton meeting with my family at various locations over the past several months. He's been helping them identify targets, set up shell companies, move money around to avoid detection. The prestigious law firm? It's real, but Pemberton's been using his position there to legitimize their cons. So today was a con from the beginning, Jake finished. Emma, think about it. How convenient was it that he showed up right after they confessed to the foundation theft? How perfectly timed was his arrival to pressure you into making a quick decision? My mind raced through the afternoon's events with new understanding. The tears, the confessions, the desperate pleas for help, how much of it had been genuine, and how much had been calculated manipulation. The foundation theft, I said slowly. Is it real? Oh, it's real. They definitely stole the money. But they're not facing imminent prosecution. The foundation is still investigating, still gathering evidence. The board meeting tomorrow that would finalize charges? That's fiction. I felt like I was falling into a bottomless pit. So they came to me under false pretenses. They came to you because they figured out you were worth $50 million, and they wanted a piece of it, Jake said bluntly. The sob story about needing help with legal fees was just the opening gambit. Once you'd agreed to help them once, they'd be back for more. And more. And more. I thought about the conditions I'd imposed, the therapy and volunteer work and public apologies. Had any of it mattered? Had they simply agreed because they were playing a longer game? There's something else, Jake said, pulling out one final document. Something that's going to hurt. I braced myself. What now? The night Grandma Rose died, Jake said quietly. She didn't die peacefully in her sleep like they told you. My world stopped. What? She was conscious, Emma. Lucid. She spent her last 3 days asking for you, begging them to call you, to bring you to see her. Jake's voice was gentle but relentless. They told her you were too busy with college, that you couldn't be bothered to visit a dying old woman. Tears I'd been holding back all day finally broke free. No. No, they wouldn't. She died thinking you didn't care about her, Jake said. She died believing that the granddaughter she loved most in the world couldn't spare a few hours to say goodbye. I doubled over in my chair, sobbing with a grief that was 18 years overdue. My grandmother, the one person in my family who'd truly believed in me, had died thinking I'd abandoned her. And I'd never known. I'd grieved her loss, but I'd never known she'd grieved mine too. I'm sorry, Jake said, coming around the desk to put a comforting hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Emma. But you needed to know the truth. Through my tears, I looked up at the evidence spread across his desk, years of lies, theft, manipulation, and cruelty documented in black and white. What do I do now? I whispered. That's up to you, Jake said. But whatever you decide, make sure you're doing it with all the facts. I drove home slowly, my mind churning with everything Jake had revealed. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made my decision. My family was still in my living room, looking anxious but hopeful. Pemberton was off his phone, smiling with the satisfaction of a deal well negotiated. Excellent news, he announced as I entered. The foundation has agreed to settle. Full restitution plus penalties, $4.2 million total, and no criminal charges will be filed. Wonderful, I said quietly. And I suppose you've already prepared the wire transfer instructions? Of course. He handed me a document. Just sign here, and we can have this resolved tonight. I took the paper and pretended to read it, though I was really studying his face. Jake was right, there was something calculating in Pemberton's expression, something that didn't quite match his professional demeanor. Before I sign anything, I said, I'd like to clarify a few details about the timeline. Mom looked nervous. What kind of details? Well, for instance, when exactly is this foundation board meeting where they'll finalize criminal charges? Pemberton consulted his notes. Tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. And you're certain about that timing? Absolutely. I spoke with their lead counsel personally. I nodded thoughtfully. That's interesting, because I just called the foundation myself. They told me their board doesn't meet again until next month, and they're still in the early stages of their investigation. The silence that followed was deafening. Pemberton's professional mask slipped just slightly. Perhaps there was some confusion. Perhaps, I agreed. Just like there might be confusion about your relationship with my family. Tell me, Mr. Pemberton, how long have you been working together on various projects? Dad's face had gone white. Sarah was staring at her hands. Mom looked like she might faint. I don't know what you're implying, Pemberton said carefully. I'm not implying anything, I said, pulling out my phone and showing them the photos Jake had given me. I'm stating facts. You've been photographed meeting with my family multiple times over the past year. You've helped them set up shell companies. You've been their partner in several fraudulent charity schemes. The mask came off completely then. Pemberton's expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw the real man underneath the polished facade. Prove it, he said coldly. I don't have to, I replied calmly. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm just someone who's learned not to trust people who lie to me. I looked at my family, these people who'd spent the day confessing their sins and begging my forgiveness, all while running yet another con. Did you really think I was that easy to fool? I asked them. Did you really think I'd built a $50 million company by being gullible and trusting? Emma, please, Mom started, but I held up my hand. No more lies, I said firmly. No more manipulation. No more playing on my emotions or my sense of family obligation. I walked to the door and held it open. Get out. All of you. And don't ever come back. You can't just, Sarah began. I can, and I am. My voice was ice cold now, all pretense of warmth gone. You came into my home, sat on my furniture, and tried to con me out of $4 million while spinning lies about family and forgiveness. You made me relive 18 years of pain and rejection, all so you could set me up for your latest scheme. Pemberton was already gathering his papers, clearly recognizing a lost cause when he saw one. But worst of all, I continued, my voice breaking slightly, you made me believe, for just a few hours, that maybe we could be a real family. That maybe you'd finally realized you'd been wrong about me. That maybe I could finally have what I'd wanted my whole life, parents and a sister who loved and respected me. I wiped away angry tears. That was the cruelest part of your con. Not the money you wanted to steal, but the hope you let me feel before you planned to crush it. They filed past me in silence, their heads down, their grand scheme collapsed around them. Pemberton paused at the door. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, it is, I replied. Because unlike my family, I document everything. My lawyers already have copies of all the evidence my cousin found. If you or anyone else tries to come after me again, those documents go straight to the FBI. After they left, I stood in my foyer for a long time, surrounded by the silence of my empty house. Then I picked up my phone and called Jake. It's done, I told him. How do you feel? I considered the question. How did I feel? Angry, certainly. Betrayed, absolutely. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. Free, I said finally. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. 6 months later, I was sitting in my therapist's office, the same Dr. Patricia Williams I'd recommended for my family's counseling, though they'd never called her, talking about the aftermath of what I'd come to think of as the final con. How do you feel about your decision to cut them off completely? She asked. I looked out her window at the city below, people going about their lives, unaware of the family dramas and betrayals playing out in therapy offices and living rooms across the world. I feel peaceful, I said honestly. For years, I carried around this narrative that I was somehow defective, that there was something wrong with me that made me unlovable to my own family. But now I understand that their rejection was never about my worthiness. It was about their fear. Fear of what? Fear that I'd see through their lies. Fear that I'd hold them accountable. Fear that I'd expect them to be better people than they were willing to be. I leaned back in the comfortable chair. It's actually quite liberating to realize that someone else's inability to love you says nothing about your lovability and everything about their capacity for love. Dr. Williams nodded. Have you heard from them since that night? Indirectly. I pulled out my phone and showed her a news article. They were arrested 3 weeks ago. Federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Apparently, the FBI had been building a case against them for months, and my cousin's evidence was the final piece they needed. How do you feel about that? Honestly? Sad. Not sad enough to bail them out, I learned that lesson, but sad that it came to this. Sad that they chose crime over honesty, manipulation over genuine connection. I put my phone away. But also relieved that I'm not entangled in their legal problems. 6 months ago, I might have been tempted to help them again. Now I know better. What changed? I thought about it for a moment. I stopped confusing love with enabling. I stopped confusing family loyalty with accepting abuse. And I stopped believing that I owed them anything just because we shared DNA. The truth was, the months since confronting my family had been the most peaceful of my adult life. Without the constant background noise of wondering why they'd rejected me, without the hope that maybe someday they'd accept me, I'd been free to focus on building genuine relationships with people who valued me for who I was. I've been thinking about Grandma Rose a lot, I continued. About what Jake told me about her final days. That must have been very painful to learn. It was. But it also helped me understand something important. I pulled out a small velvet box from my purse. Inside was a ring, Grandma Rose's engagement ring, which I'd bought back from the pawn shop where my parents had sold it years ago. She left me her inheritance because she saw something in me that my parents couldn't see. She believed in my potential, my character, my ability to make something meaningful of my life. I slipped the ring onto my finger. And you know what? She was right. I did make something meaningful of my life. Not because of her money, they stole that, but because of her belief in me. Dr. Williams smiled. It sounds like you've found a way to honor her memory. I have. I've started a scholarship foundation, the Rose Carter Foundation for STEM Education. It provides full scholarships for underprivileged students, especially those from dysfunctional family situations who need extra support to achieve their potential. It had been incredibly fulfilling work. In just 6 months, we'd awarded scholarships to 37 students, and I'd received letters from recipients that made me cry with joy instead of grief. One girl wrote to thank me, I continued, and she said something that really stuck with me. She said, "Thank you for seeing my potential even though my family doesn't." It was like getting a message from my 18-year-old self. That must have been very moving. It was. But it also made me realize something. My family's rejection didn't just hurt me, it taught me empathy for others who've experienced similar rejection. It gave me the ability to recognize potential that others might overlook. In a weird way, their inability to love me made me better at loving others. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I reflected on how much had changed. Not just externally, though the foundation work had been incredibly rewarding, but internally. The constant low-level anxiety I'd carried for years, the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with me, had simply disappeared. "There's something else," I said. "Something I haven't told you yet." Dr. Williams waited patiently. "I've met someone." I couldn't help but smile. "His name is David, and he's a teacher at one of the schools where our foundation provides scholarships. He's brilliant and kind and completely unimpressed by my money." "How does that feel?" "Terrifying and wonderful at the same time." I laughed. He knew nothing about my family situation when we met. He just knew me as Emma, the woman who started a scholarship foundation. And you know what? He likes that Emma. He thinks she's smart and funny and worth spending time with. That's wonderful. It is. But it's also scary because for the first time in my life, I'm in a relationship where I don't feel like I have to prove my worth or earn love through achievement. He just likes me. For me. Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly. "How does your experience with your family affect this new relationship?" "That's the thing, it's actually been helpful. I know what manipulation looks like now. I know what conditional love feels like. I know what it's like to be valued only for what I can provide rather than who I am." I twisted Grandma Rose's ring on my finger. "So when David does the opposite, when he's interested in my thoughts rather than my bank account, when he supports my decisions rather than trying to change me, I can recognize that as genuine." "You've learned to trust your instincts." Exactly. My family spent years telling me I was wrong about everything, that my perceptions weren't valid, that I was too sensitive or too demanding. But now I know my instincts were right all along. They were treating me badly, and I was right to feel hurt by it. I pulled out my phone again and showed her a text message from Jake, saw the news about the foundation's latest scholarship recipients. "Grandma Rose would be so proud of what you've built." "Jake's been incredible through all of this," I said. "He's the one family member who truly cared about me as a person rather than as a source of drama or money." He's like the brother I never had. It sounds like you've been able to create your own family. I have. David, Jake, the team at the foundation, even some of the scholarship recipients who stay in touch, we're building something real together. Something based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or manipulation. As our session wound down, Dr. Williams asked her usual closing question, "What do you want to focus on between now and our next appointment?" I thought about it. Gratitude, actually. I know that sounds strange, given everything that happened, but I'm genuinely grateful for how things turned out. Grateful? My family's betrayal was terrible, but it also freed me from a toxic dynamic that was holding me back. If they'd managed to con me out of $4 million, I would have spent the next few years sending them more money whenever they asked. I would have enabled their criminal behavior and stayed trapped in a dysfunctional relationship that was never going to get better. I stood up and gathered my purse. Instead, their greed and dishonesty showed me exactly who they were, and it gave me permission to finally walk away. I'm free to build the life I want with people who value me. I'm free to honor Grandma Rose's memory in ways that actually matter. I'm free to love and be loved without conditions or manipulation. That's a profound shift in perspective. It is. And you know what the best part is? I don't hate them anymore. I don't wish bad things for them. I just don't think about them much at all. They're not the central drama of my life anymore. They're just people who made bad choices and have to live with the consequences. I walked toward the door, then paused. Actually, there's one more thing I want to share. Dr. Williams looked up expectantly. I got a letter last week from a woman named Carol. She said she'd read about my family's arrests in the newspaper and recognized the names because she donated money to one of their fake charities 5 years ago. She'd lost her husband to cancer and wanted to help other families avoid the financial stress she experienced. I pulled the letter from my purse. She wrote to apologize for not reporting her suspicions at the time. She said she'd felt something was off about their charity, but she didn't trust her instincts. She felt guilty for letting other people get scammed too. That must have been difficult to read. It was, but not in the way you might think. See, Carol isn't the first person who's reached out with a similar story. There have been dozens of people who donated to my family's fake charities over the years, and almost all of them said the same thing. They had a gut feeling something was wrong, but they ignored it. I sat back down for a moment. It made me realize something important. My family didn't just hurt me, they hurt everyone who came into contact with them. Carol, who lost money she could barely afford to donate. The kids who should have received scholarships from the foundation they robbed. The family members who were forced to participate in lies they didn't understand. That's a heavy realization. But also a liberating one. For years, I thought I was the problem. I thought there was something about me that made people want to lie to me, exclude me, hurt me. But now I see that my family hurt everyone they touched. I wasn't uniquely terrible, I was just the person who posed the biggest threat to their schemes. I folded Carol's letter carefully and put it away. So I've been reaching out to their victims, connecting them with resources, sometimes helping financially when I can. It's become part of the foundation's mission, not just helping deserving students, but repairing some of the damage my family caused. How does that feel? Like I'm finally free from their legacy. Instead of carrying around the shame of being rejected by them, I'm actively working to undo the harm they caused. It's given me a sense of purpose that goes beyond just personal healing. As I left the therapy office and walked to my car, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. A year ago, I'd been successful but emotionally stuck, still carrying the wounds of childhood rejection and wondering what was wrong with me. Now I was building something meaningful with people who valued me, using my resources to help others, and finally understanding that my worth had never been in question, only my family's ability to recognize it. My phone buzzed with a text from David, "Dinner at 7? I want to hear about your day." I smiled, typing back, "Perfect. I have a lot to tell you." 6 months ago, that message would have triggered anxiety. What if I said the wrong thing? What if he got tired of hearing about my family drama? What if I wasn't interesting enough to hold his attention? Now, I just felt excited to share my thoughts with someone who genuinely cared about them. As I drove home through the city I'd made my own, past the office building where my company had started, toward the house where I'd confronted my family's lies, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete contentment with who I was and the choices I'd made. The final chapter of my relationship with my birth family had been painful, but it had also been necessary. They'd taught me valuable lessons, not the ones they'd intended to teach, but the ones I'd needed to learn. I'd learned that love without respect isn't love at all. I'd learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who show up for you consistently and honestly. I'd learned that success isn't about proving your worth to people who refuse to see it, but about building something meaningful with people who already recognize your value. Most importantly, I'd learned that healing doesn't require forgiveness from the people who hurt you. It requires understanding that their inability to love you properly says nothing about your lovability and everything about their limitations. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Jake's car parked out front. Through the window, I could see him and David on my patio, setting up dinner on the outdoor table, laughing about something. My chosen family, the people who'd seen my worth without needing years of proof. I sat in my car for just a moment, taking in the scene. This was what I'd always wanted: people who enjoyed my company, who sought out my thoughts and opinions, who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. Not because they felt obligated to, not because they wanted something from me, but because they genuinely cared about me as a person. The scholarship foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We now had partnerships with schools across 3 states, and I'd hired a full-time staff to manage the day-to-day operations. But more than that, we'd created a community. Recipients stayed in touch with each other and with us. Former scholarship winners came back to mentor new recipients, and the whole program had become a network of support that went far beyond just financial assistance. One of our recent recipients, Maria, had reminded me so much of myself at that age: brilliant, ambitious, but from a family that saw her dreams as unrealistic fantasies. When she'd gotten accepted to MIT with a full scholarship from our foundation, her parents had tried to talk her out of going, saying she should stay home and help support the family instead. But Maria had something I hadn't had at her age: a support system that believed in her potential. Our foundation didn't just pay for her education, we provided mentorship, counseling support, and a community of people who understood what it was like to pursue dreams that your family couldn't comprehend. She'd written to me just last week: "Ms. Carter, I don't know if you realize this, but you didn't just pay for my college, you showed me that it's possible to build your own family out of people who truly see and value you. Thank you for teaching me that I don't need my birth family's approval to pursue my dreams." Reading that letter, I'd realized that the girl I'd been at 18, desperate for her family's approval, willing to make herself smaller to earn their love, that girl was finally, completely healed. I got out of the car and walked toward my house, toward the people who'd chosen to be part of my life just as I'd chosen to be part of theirs. Jake waved when he saw me, and David smiled, that warm, uncomplicated smile that had first caught my attention at a foundation event 6 months ago. "How did therapy go?" David asked as I joined them on the patio. "Good," I said, settling into the chair they'd left for me. "Really good. I think I'm finally ready to close that chapter completely." "Meaning?" Jake asked, though I suspected he already knew. "Meaning I'm done processing my family's betrayal. I'm done trying to understand their motivations or figure out what I could have done differently. I'm done with all of it." I looked around at the life I'd built, the people I'd chosen, the work that gave my days meaning. I'm ready to focus completely on what I'm building now, rather than what was taken from me before. Jake raised his glass of wine. "To building something better." David raised his glass too. "To chosen family." To freedom, I added, and we clinked glasses as the sun set over the city. Later that evening, after Jake had gone home and David and I were cleaning up the dinner dishes, he asked me something that stopped me in my tracks. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they'd never come to you that day? If they'd never tried that final con? I considered the question while I loaded plates into the dishwasher. You mean, would I have eventually reached out to them? Maybe. Or would you have spent the rest of your life wondering what was wrong with you, why they'd rejected you? It was a sobering thought. Without that final betrayal, without seeing the full extent of their manipulation and cruelty, would I have remained trapped in the cycle of wondering what I could do to earn their love? I think I would have, I admitted. I think I would have carried that wound forever, always hoping that someday they'd realize they'd been wrong about me. So in a twisted way, their greed saved you. Their greed and their arrogance, I agreed. They were so confident they could manipulate me, so sure I was the same desperate, approval-seeking girl I'd been at 18, that they overplayed their hand. They showed me exactly who they were, and that freed me to finally stop trying to earn love from people who weren't capable of giving it. David dried his hands and turned to face me. Can I ask you something that might be too personal? Of course. Do you think you would have been able to build what you have now, the foundation, this life, even our relationship, if you'd still been carrying around that hope for their approval? I thought about it seriously. Would I have been able to commit fully to the foundation's mission if part of me was still trying to prove my worth to my birth family? Would I have been able to enter a healthy relationship if I was still seeking validation from people who withheld it as a form of control? No, I said quietly. I don't think I would have. I think I would have remained stuck, always looking backward, always trying to fix something that was never my responsibility to fix. He nodded. That's what I thought. It's like their final betrayal was actually the key that unlocked your prison. That's a beautiful way to put it. I moved closer to him, taking his hands. You know what I realized today in therapy? What? I spent 18 years thinking I was the victim of their story. And their treatment of me was genuinely awful. But I'm not the victim of my own story. In my story, I'm the hero who escaped a toxic situation, built something meaningful, and learned to love and be loved authentically. David smiled and pulled me into his arms. I love your story. I do too, I realized with surprise. For the first time in my life, I actually love my own story. As we stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd built through my own strength and determination, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Not gratitude for the pain, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but gratitude for my own resilience, for the people who'd helped me heal, and for the opportunities one now had to help others heal too. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Foundation's app. Another scholarship application had been submitted. Tomorrow, I'd review it along with dozens of others, looking for that spark of potential that others might miss, that determination to succeed despite difficult circumstances. It was work that filled me with purpose because I knew exactly what it felt like to have dreams that your family couldn't understand or support. I knew what it was like to wonder if you were worth investing in. And I knew what it was like to discover that the answer was an unequivocal yes. My family had tried to convince me I wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy enough, wasn't good enough for the dreams I dared to have. They'd been spectacularly wrong, and their wrongness had set me free to become exactly who I was meant to be. As I settled into bed that night, I thought about the 18-year-old girl who'd sat in her childhood kitchen, surrounded by college brochures, listening to her family tell her she wasn't capable of achieving her dreams. I wished I could go back and tell her what I knew now, that their inability to see her worth said nothing about her actual value, and everything about their limitations. But maybe that girl didn't need me to go back and tell her anything. Maybe she'd been strong enough all along to prove them wrong, to build the life she dreamed of, to become the woman she was meant to be. Maybe she'd always known she was worth more than their narrow vision of her potential. Maybe she just needed time to prove it to herself. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this from people you trusted? Have you had to learn the difference between love and manipulation, between family and the people who truly see your worth? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others realize they're not alone in their journey toward healing and self-worth.